The red light moved over the trees, changing color into a bright white glow that descended on a nearby brook. Simultaneously, a noise began, like muffled thuds on a wooden plank, as the two witnesses decided to flee the abandoned house. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to discuss the fascinating case of the Kolmården creature. August 23rd, 1967. Two 15-year-olds, pseudonymously referred to in the April Bulletin and all further accounts of this case as Eric and Inga, were on a stroll in the area around Kolmården, Sweden. Around 8 o'clock in the evening, the sun had set and they were about half a mile from their home when they noticed a reddish glow hovering over the nearby woods. It descended into the trees silently. It was then that the two teens got a creepy feeling, almost like they were being watched. So they decided to take a shortcut home. However, soon enough, Inga turned around and went back to the road to get a look at this strange glow, Eric following close behind her. They said that this glow kept moving back and forth over the trees, sometimes disappearing, and that they couldn't make out any shape behind this kind of just nebulous reddish glow. Bravely or perhaps foolishly, they decided to investigate even closer, and finally reached an area that had this abandoned cabin. They said that inside the windows they could see yellow lights hovering in one of the rooms, and that on the outside of this house, this bizarre light was kind of coming up from the ground in a fluttering motion. Now, this time, the bizarre luminous phenomena was accompanied by a sound. They heard quiet thuds, as though from a wooden plank being struck. They said that they still saw the red glow kind of moving over the head, eventually changing to this white glow and maneuvering until it landed on the far side of a nearby brook. Now, at this stage, the two young witnesses became rather spooked and decided to get the heck back home. They went to Eric's house, rang the bell, and, unfortunately for them, no one was home. So they continued on to the house next door where Eric's sisters lived. But before they could get inside, they were shocked to see this huge light, which they described as looking almost like a giant flashlight, hovering 13 feet in the air. Now, upon spotting this bizarre lighted object, a loud, high-pitched whistling came from the brook and ravine nearby, which eventually was joined by the sound of quick footsteps coming from the direction of the brook. These footsteps came in these kind of quick succession, like sharp sort of sets of footsteps, which would stop and then start again, each time appearing or sounding as though they came closer. Now, even though the kids were kind of frightened by this point, they were so confused by all of the weird phenomena that they've been seeing that they wanted to figure out what was happening. So they continued on to the nearby ravine slash brook, which seemed to be the source of these bizarre occurrences. When suddenly, someone jumped out of the bushes near the house. Eric said that it almost looked like they flew through the air. And when they landed, they stood with their head down and arms at their sides. Now, at this stage, Irma thought somehow that perhaps this figure was actually just a friend of theirs from the village playing a trick on them. Again, this is just a classic example of when people are right smack dab in the middle of an anomalous encounter. Often it seems as though their first inclination is not to jump to the wildest conclusions, such as, oh my gosh, it's a spaceman that jumped out of the bushes and is like, standing near us, but to kind of rationalize. Maybe it's a friend from the village. Maybe they're pulling a prank on me. As in the case of the infamous Flatwoods monster, the initial thought is, oh, it's a raccoon in a tree. Time and time again, you see people trying to rationalize away or kind of logic their way out of these anomalous encounters, and that is exactly what happened here. So Irma decided that, hey, she was going to go confront this thing. She began walking closer to it, Eric following just behind her. Now, as they approached this figure, it suddenly raised its head and arms in a very jerky, almost trembling motion, exposing its face. Now, it was then that the two young witnesses realized that, one, this thing was not a friend of theirs from the village, and two, it didn't even appear human. They said that this thing had a kind of disproportionately large head, with a face that they described as looking like it had a, quote, X on it. Now, as to what exactly that means, I'm not really sure. I wish I knew. I do not. The most distinct impression about the face or facial features is given by Eric, who insisted that the eyes felt piercing and hostile. There was a strong demarcation between the face and what appeared to be a pointed hood. As it lifted its arms, it held this strange box with a tube sticking out of it. Eric said that the tube appeared to have a glimmering arc kind of around it, and perhaps strangest of all, that the creature appeared to have a thin wire around each of its ankles, which gave off an intense white light. Now, curiosity turned to terror. The two kids immediately bolted for the safety of Eric's sister's house. Now, Eric's mother, who was actually at this house, attested to the fear experienced by the children. She said that they seemed to be in a state almost of shock, and that for some time afterwards, they actually refused to go outside after dark. Now, this was not the only lasting aspect of the encounter. There were actually some odd occurrences in the days following Eric and Inga's experience. Now, oddly enough, the following day, Eric found apples which had been split apart, not cut, but split, near the bushes where the monster had been seen. They were coated in a bizarre and smelly slime. Now, truthfully, I have no idea if this is connected or not, but it's definitely a weird thing to find. I guess I'm under the assumption that they did not usually find slime covered split apples in the bushes around their homes. Also nearby were a series of deep three-toed footprints. Now, these odd traces were not the only disturbances in the following days. Eric's sisters also claimed to see strange lights moving around outside, to hear soft footsteps and tapping, scraping noises. And shortly after the initial sighting, two window shutters had actually been torn off the windows of their home. This is a funky little case and was rightfully entitled Monster Report from Sweden in the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization Bulletin. It includes some really great hallmarks of anomalous encounters. For one thing, the phenomenon seemed centered kind of on this waterway, in the best place pretty much to spot countless denizens of your preferred otherworld. And this, of course, extends well beyond modern paranormal research into folkloric and even religious beliefs, as well as this abandoned empty cabin, the classic haunt of ghostly phenomenon, and oddly enough, abandoned buildings, homes, cabins, whatever, often seem to be the home, however temporary, of cryptids, from winged things to Bigfoot to manwolf. Now, yet again, we have these two great catalysts of so many paranormal sightings, what I consider maybe priming aspects for the witness: light and sound. At the beginning and each kind of juncture of this encounter, we have these punctuations of light phenomena. The red glow first, followed by the lights in the house, the red glow changing to white and quote unquote landing, eventually this flashlight, and then the fact that the creature itself had lights kind of on it, on its person. We also have the initial thudding noise, then the high pitched whine, which calls to mind, among many paranormal encounters, the infamous Sandown Sam encounter. But this high pitched sound makes an appearance, again, whether we're talking about ghosts, cryptids, or UFOs. Then, again, the footsteps, which continued throughout the following days. One of John Keel's great theories, and in my opinion, one of my absolute favorite theories regarding the paranormal, the anomalous, high strangeness, whatever, is looking at especially creature sightings as transmogrifications of energy. That these things are transients in this plane of existence and go through this spectrum of materiality. And cases like this, I think, are kind of a great example of something which follows that pattern, or at least seems to. Here it starts with this kind of nebulous red glow, which then appears to land among more kind of well-defined light phenomena, which then seems to congeal yet again into this more uniform and defined light, the flashlight-like light that they experience near their homes, terminating in the sighting of this humanoid, which still has luminous aspects on its figure. We can then almost see a further physicality in the trace evidence, the bizarre three-toed footprints, which again pop up time and time again in places that have, beyond even cryptid phenomena, UFO flaps or hauntings. Perhaps the split apples and torn shutters. Again, those, who knows if they're really connected? It seems odd that such weird things would happen in such close succession to the strange encounter that they had and not be connected before the phenomenon simply evaporates completely. Now, the interplay of lights with this case also calls to mind Paul Devereaux's theory of proto-entities, in which he noted that in these encounters, it often seems that both the entity and the object are comprised of the same material or substance. Now, in this case, we have the entity holding this lighted object and having lights on its person, which again, the bright white light seems to correlate to what the red glow kind of transformed into. What's really neat about this case is how you can look at it equally through the lens of any paranormal research. It was investigated ufologically at the time by K. Gosta Ren, APRO's Swedish representative, who brought up one of the great classics of UFO lore, the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, and the similarities to that. However, looking at it as it was billed as a monster report, in my opinion, we see a lot of similarities to Bigfoot, especially the initial thudding noise. I mean, tree knocks, anyone? Footprints were even recovered, three toes and all. Again, incidentally, three toed tracks have ties to a number of classic Bigfoot flaps. And even the silhouette of a humanoid figure with a pointed or conical head kind of bears this really striking resemblance to Bigfoot reports, not to mention the split apples and torn shutters. But then look at this case as the case of a haunting. You have these strange lights kind of observed in this abandoned house, sourceless footsteps following the witnesses. The scraping and tapping noises are straight out of early spiritualist how to guides and even modern encounters with poltergeists. On the flip side of that, you have the folkloric motifs rife in this encounter. I mean, a pointed hood or cape or cap is by now so well affiliated as to be synonymous with so many different variations of fairies, goblins, gnomes, or the distinctly Swedish tomta. Two, we have the odd affair with the apples. They weren't eaten. Oftentimes, offerings to the good folk, whichever good folk we're talking about, aren't eaten, but classically held to have their essence consumed. Interestingly enough, in certain cases of Bigfoot encounters, such as the Rochdale creature, animals like chickens are killed but not eaten. Now, the experiences at the abandoned cabin call to mind, to me at least, one of the great classics of high strangeness research, the infamous walking tree stump affair of the Reeves family. Although, let's be real, walking tree stumps is a very hard act to follow, that was simply one branch of the phenomena reported by the Reeves family. Their home was beset by poltergeist phenomena, especially what they referred to as crawling lights. And this description reminds me of how the two young witnesses described the light on the outside wall of the cabin. Now, the whole affair of the walking stumps was started by a large anomalous light disturbance, including these sourceless flashlight lights, another similarity to this case. Something really odd to me is that oftentimes it seems as though anomalous light phenomena is described more in terms of a substance or object rather than a beam, merely calling to mind the wave particle problem. Yet again, too, we have the notion that the only important part of the face of the creature was the eyes. This is something that comes up so very often, I mean, time and time again, in encounters with strange creatures, and in my opinion, seems to point to the observer being observed. I mean, indeed, this concept almost seems pact like in nature, some sort of unspoken agreement between the witness and what they're witnessing. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the Kolmården creature, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with me on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat, and be sure to check out Somewhere in the Skies, not only for excellent listening all around, but audio episodes of Just Another Tinfoil Hat every other Friday. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.